Welcome into another episode of the Fat Guy Podcast. I am the Fat Guy. Most people on the planet just call me Brett. Thank you so much for listening today. Glad to have you along. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, no matter what format you use, you can pretty much find us and subscribe. Obviously, Apple Podcast. I believe we're still on Stitcher. We're on Spotify. We're on, where? Pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast, we're there. Just search for Fat Guy Podcast. So go ahead and subscribe. If you can find the rating system, please leave us a rating. 5 stars would be nice with a short message as to why you like the podcast. And today we're going to jump into why fasting isn't starving. So to be very clear, fasting is not starving. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And I'm doing this, for a few reasons. One is because every time I fast, I have people who care about me. And this is no way a reflection about how I feel about them, because I love people to care about me. I love people to be worried about me. I love people to want the best for me. But it's to reassure those people, and also the friends and family of people who fast along with me, that your loved one is not starving. They're fine. So that's what we're going to get into today. Just a quick reminder before we jump into that. If you're not following us on social media, that'd be great too, man. Instagram and Facebook are probably the two I update the most. The username for both is Fat Guy Podcast. We're also on Twitter as well, so you can hit us up there. So I'm not going to grab specific citations from PubMed or any of the other various scientific resources that I use. And I'm not going to cite those here. If I were writing an article, I probably would do citations at the bottom. But it just gets weird when you're doing it in a podcast. But just trust me, everything that I'm about to tell you has been scientifically established through peer-reviewed research and literature. Okay? I'm not making this stuff up. I'm not telling you something that's wishful thinking. These are just factual things. So the first thing that I want to tell you is that the world record fast is 384 days. The guy's last name was Barbieri. I can't remember his first name. He fasted 384 days. Now, he did get medical supervision, and I believe the way that worked, if I'm not mistaken, is he met with him once a week. And so they would check his vitamins, they would check his electrolytes, they'd make sure his kidneys and his liver and organs weren't failing. So I believe they did urine test and a blood sample, I think is what they did. And I think at some points they even stretched it out further to where they only did it 2 weeks. And I also think for a while they only did it for once a month or something. Angus was his name, Angus Barbieri. This guy went from being morbidly obese, well over 400 pounds, to I believe he hit 100 and, God, I don't want to get it wrong, but it's in the 180s, I think. 186 pounds or something like that. He went from being morbidly obese to having a perfectly healthy weight in 384 days, which is just slightly longer than a year, and he ate no food. No food. Not only that, they followed him up for a period of 5 years, and his weight stayed within about a 5 or 6 pound range. So he never gained all the weight back or got fat again. He cured his issues that caused him to be obese. He cured the metabolic syndrome that he had, which is insulin resistance and these type things. And I'm quite sure fasting that long had a huge impact on the psychological component, the addiction component, those other things. He cured himself. So he was never a fat man. Again. So when you tell me that as an overweight person I'm going to starve if I fast, I find it quite laughable if I had no other example other than Angus Barbieri. And you can Google him. You can find the research papers. You can find stories about him. It's very impressive. So during that whole time, the whole 384 days, he took a multivitamin and he did electrolytes a little bit. Not even all the time. I think they've tested him twice and his electrolytes were low out of that entire 384 days. I could be wrong, but it's a very low number of times. I believe it's 2 different times his electrolytes were a little bit low. And electrolytes are salt, potassium, calcium, magnesium, various salts is what electrolytes are. And they're very important, don't get me wrong. Okay? Now, let's talk about fasting versus starving. Those little kids you see in Ethiopia on the commercials where they're asking you to donate 19 cents a day to feed a starving child, and you see those children and adults whose bellies are all blown up and distended. They're obviously malnourished and they're dying from starvation. Those kids don't need to fast, okay? For them, fasting is starving. If you're a 5'10" person, let's just say, I'm just going to pick something in the middle, 5'8" to 5'10". So you're not really tall, you're not really short, you're just a middle of the road average person. 5'10", and you weigh 120 pounds, let's say. If you fast, that's starving. Okay, that would be starving for you. Your body does not have backup adipose tissue, which is food storage, to sustain you not eating. So you would be starving. Me, on the other hand, as a person, let's go back to my starting weight. When I first started, I weighed 410 pounds. I was 6'4". A 6'4" person that weighs 410 pounds, if they don't eat, they're not starving. I'm assuming probably most people that listen to this podcast are believers in the good Lord. And if you're not, it's evolution. Either way works. Either our bodies were created this way or they have evolved to be well-oiled machines this way. Either way works, no matter which way you believe. Some people try to believe both, although I don't know how that's possible. Nevertheless, why would your body be designed to take excess food consumption and store it in your body for later use in times of famine, for you to not be able to stop eating and use it in times of famine? That doesn't make any sense. Like, your body is specifically designed to store excess food and consume it later during times of famine. Now, for most people in a Western society, there are no natural times of famine. Food is everywhere. Food is abundant. So the only times of famine we'll ever experience is times of self-induced famine, and that would be fasting. That's what fasting is. So I'm going to compare two things, because people don't mind you restricting calories. They're like, oh, just cut your calories back, Eat smaller portion sizes. This is something that's going to blow your mind. You can find the literature to back it up. Overweight people who restrict their calories, in other words, instead of eating 3,000 calories a day, they cut back to 2,000 calories a day, and really obese people easily eat 3,000 calories a day. I figured it up at my heaviest. I was probably eating about 3,800 to 4,000 calories a day is what I was eating when I was 410 pounds, to sustain that and even be slightly gaining. But you do calorie restriction, right? So you cut your calories way back. That's what they tell you to do. Eat less, move more. That's all you got to do. Eat less, move more. Well, you go look at the scientific literature on this, peer-reviewed. You'll see what happens. So let's say you cut your calories back 20%, right? Well, you're going to start losing weight. But your body is not stupid. Your body senses that it's getting less food than it normally gets. And so it's going to slow down your metabolism an equal amount of rate so that it is burning what you're eating. So that's why you have plateaus when you're calorie restricting, okay? So let's say you reduce your calories and you lose 10 pounds and then you stall and you're just there. You don't lose no more. Well, what has happened is you've reduced your calories. Your metabolism has slowed down to equal the amount of calories that you're eating, and you're just going to stay there. So how do you do it? Well, you got to restrict more calories, right? So, let's say you restrict another 10, 15% off the top of your calorie intake, and you'll lose a few pounds or whatever. And then your body will go, wow, we're getting even less food now. I'm going to slow my metabolism down. I'm not going to burn as much energy because we need to keep this in line to keep this human alive. Your body's very smart. Everything it does is to keep you alive. It'll do whatever it takes. So it diverts resources, shuts down its energy consumption, and bam, next thing you know, the amount of calories you're burning is equal to what you're eating, and you stall, and there you are. You can't lose any more weight. So once you hit that stall point, well, what do you do to lose more weight? Well, I got to cut some more calories, right? So you lop off another 10% or 15% of calories. And bam, it'll start working. You'll start losing a little bit of weight. But over the course of a month, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, or whatever, your body will slowly slow down its metabolism until it equals the amount of calories that you're eating to keep you alive. That's what your body is designed to do, is to keep you alive. Now, why in those times doesn't your body just make up the difference with your fat stores? Why doesn't it? Well, what causes you to access fat storage is hormones. There's about 40 of them total, last I read. I just read a paper on this last week. But the primary one is called insulin. And most people probably know insulin from diabetes, but they don't really understand it. They just know if you have diabetes, you got to take insulin. If you're a type 2 diabetic, pardon me for yawning, if you're type 2 diabetic, you may get by without taking insulin early on. You may do metformin or something, but eventually things will progress to the point that they'll start making you take insulin. Insulin does a few things. Insulin rises to handle elevated blood sugar levels and to bring them back down. Insulin's job is kind of like an escort. It escorts sugar into the cells, where your muscle cells, into the liver, etc. And you become what's known as insulin resistant. This is before you have full-blown type 2 diabetes. First, you're insulin resistant, where your cells resist the insulin. The insulin knocks on the door, and you have to have larger and larger amounts of insulin to get them to open the door and accept these sugar cells, right? So more sugar stays in your bloodstream longer, and you keep releasing more and more insulin. So here's the nifty thing about insulin. That's one of its primary goals. Its other primary goal is the fat storage. So it's a signaler. So when insulin levels are high, insulin signals your body to store fat or adipose tissue, right? When insulin levels are low, that is a signal for your body to consume energy from your fat stores. Okay, it's a switch. So let's get that in our head, right? Insulin is a hormone. When insulin levels are high, it signals your body to store fat. And when insulin levels fall low, it signals your body to release fat and convert it into fuel for the body. Now, when you're eating throughout the day, let's say you get up at 6 and you eat breakfast, and then you have a snack or a Coke, and then you eat lunch, and then later on you might have a snack or a Coke, and then you eat dinner, and then before you go to bed you have another snack, or maybe you're sipping a Coke. You are literally consuming calories all day from 6 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. The only time that stops is at 10 o'clock at night. Then it takes your body, 2 to 4 hours to finally get your blood sugar levels back low enough that your insulin can stop working. And then your insulin levels finally slow down. So let's say that happens at around midnight to 2. Let's split the difference and say it happens at 1. And then you're up starting the thing again at 6 o'clock the next morning, which means you gave your body a total of 5 hours. Of 5 hours in a low enough insulin state that your body would access fat storage for fuel. But you're sleeping. Your body doesn't need any fat storage, so it's not going to access any fat storage. It's just not going to do anything because it's not necessary at that point. So, let's go back to the example of reducing your calories, right? You reduce your calories and your metabolism slows. Your insulin levels, you're still eating. You're still eating probably your 3 meals a day. Most people do when they cut their calories back. They still eat the same amount of meals. They'll still have a drink in between. Your insulin levels are still always elevated. So your body never gets the signal to go dip into its fat reserves for energy. I think I've covered that probably as conclusively as I can, and we'll compare that with fasting. So anything I speak about now in terms of fasting is for an obese person or an overweight person. This is a person that's carrying extra 20 pounds of weight, extra 30, extra 50, extra 100. You have extra weight. To be clear, though, you don't have to be overweight to go without food and it'll be fine. A person who has an average healthy body weight, this is a person who, they're not fat, but they have fatty tissue. And you may not understand how that's possible, but it is. You think about a person who, now not a bodybuilder who has ripped their body down to where they're like 5% body fat, but I'm talking about a normal person that's in the 15 to 20% body fat range. That's a thin person. Even those people can survive without eating for 4 to 6 weeks, no problem. They have enough fat on them to sustain them 4 to 6 weeks with no problem. So you can imagine somebody that's 30 pounds, 50 pounds, 75 pounds, 100 pounds overweight, how long you can go without eating with all that fat. So let's compare fasting to our early example of calorie restriction. The first day of fasting, your body is burning up all that glucose. That's your glycogen stores. That's the sugar that's been stored in your muscles. It's been stored in your liver. First you use it up in your muscles, then your liver starts releasing it and you use it up. And at some point in time, it's gone and it's down to its bare minimum. That takes, for most people, depending on how active you are, that can be in the first 24 hours to 48 hours of fasting for that process to fully complete. Once it completes, your insulin is a super low level. It's as low as it'll ever get. Once your insulin level gets that low, it opens up the floodgates for fat burning. It signals your body that we are now in a time of famine, and all those hundreds and hundreds of thousands of calories that we've been storing, let's start eating them. So whatever foods you've been eating all these years, it's stored on you. All the extra bacon and eggs you ate for breakfast, all the extra cereal you ate for breakfast has been converted to fat and stored. All the extra hamburger and fries you ate has been converted to fat and stored. All the extra steak and potatoes and broccoli that you ever ate has been converted to fat and stored. So your body is simply accessing it now. It's eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And it's eating as much as it wants because your insulin level is at its bare minimum, which opens the floodgate to fat burning. So if your body needs 1,000 calories today to function well, it's going to access 1,000 calories of fat tissue and convert it into energy several ways, but primarily in the form of ketone bodies as fuel. And your body loves ketone bodies as fuel. It thrives on it, so you're not depriving it in any way. And you function just fine. If you need 2,000 calories today, since there's no inhibitor to prevent your body from accessing the fat storage on your body, it will access the fat storage and it'll burn 2,000 calories today from fat. If you need 3,000 calories today, your body will access all 3,000 calories that it needs because there's nothing inhibiting it from accessing your fat storage. So you're not starving. You're eating like a king. No matter how much energy you need, your body has it stored and has the green light to burn it. Now compare that to our previous example of calorie restriction, where you never get the green light to fully open up and burn fat stores, and your metabolism is getting slower and slower and slower. So let's talk about metabolism. I already talked about it with calorie restriction. There's endless amounts of studies that confirm that your metabolism, actually increases in the first 3 to 5 days of fasting. So your metabolism actually goes up. But after that, it'll stall and then it'll slowly fall, and it'll fall a little bit. But for the average person, it never falls below about 20% off of its peak. You know? So let's imagine that your metabolism is running at 100% of exactly where it needs to be. When you go into a long-term fast, it'll never be more than 20% lower than that. It'll fall a bit and then it stops. That's its bare minimum. That's just where it remains. On the other hand, they've done several different studies of people who calorie restrict, and there's almost no bottom to the metabolism drop. I mean, it could drop 40%. You look at those Biggest Loser contestants that they studied 5 years after being on the Biggest Loser, where they brought your calories down to, I think they were feeding those people like 800 to 1,000 calories a day. And those people were working out 8 hours every day, riding bikes and running and jumping and living for a solid 8 hours. Can you imagine how much stress you're putting on your body? You're telling your body we need all these calories, but you ain't feeding us enough to compensate for it. But since we are eating, I think they had them eat 6 meals a day, I think is the regimen. So their insulin levels never drop. So they can't access their fat storage in the way that they need to. Like, they can access it out of necessity, but the floodgates are never open like it needs to. So the way they compensate, the way their bodies compensated was by lowering their metabolism to a super low level so that they could live off of what fat storage was being released. But then 5 years later, all of those people were fat again. And not only were they fat again, their metabolism was permanently damaged. There was this one guy. Here's the beautiful thing they did. They tested those people's metabolism before they started Biggest Loser. They went in day one, tested, and saw what their basal metabolism rate was. So they had that on file. They went back 5 years later. There was this one guy. His metabolism had fallen so much, he had to eat 800 calories less a day than what he should be eating just to maintain his weight because his metabolism was permanently damaged from that crap. It's just not even close. So, God, I hope I've covered the metabolism. I hope I've covered why you're not starving when you're fasting. If you're skinny and you're fasting, then yes, you're starving. You're just starving. But if you're fat and you're fasting, you ain't starving, honey. You ain't nowhere near starving. Your body is feasting on a smorgasbord of food that you've been storing for decades. And then the question as to how long you can fast. I mean, oh God, I could just go through person after person after person. Angus Barbieri, the world record, many people think it's Jesus. It's not. It's Angus Barbieri. 384 days the man didn't eat no food. Obviously, Jesus went 40 days and 40 nights. There's a woman on YouTube who did a fast strictly for religious reasons. And you can watch her. She didn't have that much extra fat to begin with. But she was fasting strictly for religious reasons to get closer to God and all this stuff. And I want to say she fasted something like 80 days. It was an insane amount of it. It might have been 120, but I think it was at least 80. You can go find her, though. Gosh, she was so thin and waifish looking and unhealthy at the end of that fast. She should not have been fasting that long. Nevertheless, she survived it. Then my new hero is a guy who has a YouTube channel. The name of his YouTube channel is called The Fasting Fat Man. He's a black guy who's really fat. He started out over 500 pounds. Him and his wife had a baby. He decided he wanted to be around for his child's life. So he's like, heck with this. Fat's got to go. He started out doing some keto and some intermittent fasting and stuff, but then he just went into a full-blown fast. And once he started, he just kept going. He fasted 150 days. The man fasted 150 days, and I think in 150 days, I want to say he lost 250 pounds in 150 days. But you can go follow his story. He's eating now. He eats one meal a day, and he's doing keto. And still losing weight, by the way. But he's fine. He just took electrolytes every day, drank his water, and he took a multivitamin. Fasting is not starving if you're overweight. Your biggest issue is going to be an electrolyte imbalance. You need electrolytes, those salts in your body, and the salts are, there's more types of salts than just sodium, which is table salt, sodium chloride. Okay, you got sodium, you got potassium, you got magnesium, you have some other salts. Those are things that are conducive to electricity. And in case you don't know this, all your little cells in your body and your muscles and your brain and all that stuff, and your heart especially, fires off electricity. You need those salts in there to conduct the electricity. So you don't get enough salts, you die, obviously. It's an easy fix, though. If you're only fasting a few days, it's not that big a deal. And there's people who water fast for a month, and it's fine. But I say if you're going to fast more than 2 or 3 days, just go ahead and do you some salt, okay? You can buy light salt in the grocery store. It's half sodium, half potassium. Mix a teaspoon of that in some water in the morning, do it again in the afternoon. that gets you your most of your salts that you need in during the day. It's no problem. You'll feel fine. You can fast. Make sure you're drinking plenty of water. You'll be fine. You want to slip in some magnesium, get you a good high-quality magnesium pill. You don't have to take it every day, probably. Take it every 3-4 days. Take it once a week. Take it twice a week or something. You'll be fine. If you don't feel your muscles cramping up really bad and you're not getting super, super dizzy and lightheaded to the point that it feels dangerous, your electrolytes are probably fine. And there's several electrolyte products you can buy. Dr. Berg sells one. It's rather expensive, but it has a lot of potassium. Potassium's hard to get because potassium can be deadly if you take too much. But the problem is that they've gone to extreme with that. Like the average person should get between 4,000, 5,000, I believe it's milligrams. I don't remember if it's grams or milligrams. Maybe it's grams of potassium a day. If you get more than that, bad things can happen. But they limit you in the pills, the supplement pills they sell you, they're 99 grams of that, milligrams. I mean, you'd have to take 5 or 6 bottles of those pills for it to even come close. So for a person that's fasting and needs potassium, it's hard to get it out of those. But there are a few supplement powders out there. Dr. Berg's is one. There's a product called Zip Fizz that I love a lot. It has really high levels of potassium. It doesn't have high levels of sodium, though, so you still need to do some salt. I do salt pills. Just get you some sodium chloride pills. I get the ones that are 1 gram. You can find them on Amazon. 1 gram sodium chloride pills. Pop a couple of those a day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. You should be fine. And then drink water. That's my preferred way. I like the Zip Fizz because it has flavor to it. So I have a couple Zip Fizzes a day, a couple sodium chloride tablets a day. You do that and then just kind of judge how you feel. You're going to be fine. Headaches are normal. If you're fasting and you're having a headache, there's nothing strange about that. That's just normal. It should go away after a while. May take several days, may take a week, whatever. It may come and go. May have it, may go for a while, may come back. Headache is perfectly normal. What's not normal is extreme dizziness and lightheadedness and that type of stuff. So that stuff gets bad. Then you need to start making maybe some considerations for what you might need to do. So I'm not a doctor. I can't tell you to fast. Please don't misconstrue anything I've said in this podcast. This is not me advocating you fast or telling you fast. I'm just telling you some science behind fasting, some science behind calorie restricting. And anytime you're going to pursue anything, whether it be calorie restricting or fasting or whatever, you should consult with a doctor, a good doctor. Make sure you got a good one. That's the most important part. Thanks for listening today. Follow us on social media, Fat Guy Podcast. And subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time.